Divers, what did you find that you couldn't explain? I don't know if this counts, but I'm a water lover, so maybe so. While water skiing in the lake one time, Louisiana, when I flew off I landed like pretty much on top of an alligator. I kind of felt my leg hit him, and we were like eye to eye when I gasped for air. Then he went under. The moments after that were the most terrifying moments of my life because I was so certain I'd feel him bite my foot any second and drag me under. I started screaming and couldn't stop until the boat was back to me. You don't realize how long 2 to 3 minutes is until you're alone in the open water. Never again for me. That sounds pretty intense. Hitting an alligator and being in the water alone must have been really scary. It's wild to think about how quickly everything can change. Those moments when you're waiting for help can feel endless. It makes sense you'd want to avoid that situation in the future. Water can be fun, but it's definitely not worth risking it with alligators around. I was diving in Thailand, and we were at a site diving where there were 2 steep hills, underwater full of rock formations, coral, etc. Between these 2 areas was a sandy bottom with scattered rocks ranging between the 1 to 5 meters across, all full of holes and full of life. We were swimming from one hill to the next and inspecting these rocks along the way. I was swimming along one large one when I get whacked in the side of my stomach very hard. It startled the shit out of me, and I quickly back off. The dive instructor noticed and came over, and we inspected what happened. That's when we had a gigantic moray eel. I'm later told it was a giant moray. He was absolutely massive, never seen one so big, was easily a couple meters in length, and was probably as wide as my head. We assume I had passed too close without noticing, and he attacked. He hit my BCD and luckily didn't persist. That sounds intense. Diving can be unpredictable, especially with creatures like moray eels around. It's wild how something so big can sneak up on you like that. Good thing the instructor was there to check it out. Definitely a close call. I wonder how many people have had a similar experience with those eels. I like kayaking when I get the chance, but one day, in a lake up in Glacier Nation Park, Montana, the most beautiful place I've ever been, and I totally recommend it, when I saw a small boat. A little vintage-looking, tiny motorboat. The little tiny mini speedboats you always see in 70s movies set in Miami or something. Just a few feet underwater, perfectly preserved. I could reach down and touch it. There was no signs of damage, no signs of why it sunk. It was strangely eerie. I had to leave because, for some reason, it just freaked me out. The idea that something could sit inches from the air, but still submerged for years, probably. It made me so uncomfortable, and I don't know why. That sounds like an interesting experience. Kayaking in such a beautiful place must have been nice, but stumbling upon a sunken boat would be unsettling. It's strange how things can look so perfect, yet be so eerie at the same time. I can understand feeling freaked out by something out of place like that. Just goes to show how nature can surprise us in unexpected ways. South Floridian here. I grew up fishing and diving, which has led to a few notable stories. The one that sticks out the most was during my high school years. I had just taken a deep breath and gone down to a reef about 30 or so below. My friend was still on the boat above, and we were the only ones on the reef. I got down to the bottom and noticed a thin, upright pole. Upon closer inspection, it was indeed a normal fishing pole, but old and rotten under the water for so long. Right as I was going to grab the pole, it was pulled from my hands, just shooting up and away, as if being reeled in by the other side. It was gone within a matter of seconds, so I started my resurface, expecting to see another boat responsible. No boats, nothing in sight, but of course just my friend and his boat. I never bothered telling him, because he would have never believed me anyway. The only explanation I might have is that the pole was still attached to a fish or something, although I doubt it. Still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. That's an interesting experience. Finding an old fishing pole underwater is one thing, but having it pulled away must have been a strange moment. It's kind of eerie to think about what might have happened. The idea of it being attached to a fish makes sense, but it's hard to say for sure. Not telling your friend seems like a smart move, since he probably wouldn't understand. It's one of those stories that sticks with you. When I was younger, I used to dive and snorkel a lot in the Florida Keys. On one trip, I think I was snorkeling, I was swimming, and everything was great until I spotted a group of big barracudas. So, I've run into small sharks and eels while diving, and I'm generally fearless, but I stopped in terror when I saw the barracudas. One in particular was closest to me, while the rest of the group was a little further. He turned a bit and made eye contact with me. They have been known to attack divers, so I swam away slowly. Luckily, they didn't come towards me. I don't think there was a real chance that they would have attacked me, but it was the most worried for my safety that I'd ever been while diving. I think what was the scariest to me was that the sharks and eels had basically ignored me, but the barracuda looked at me, seemed to think about me, and then decided, nah, you can go. Phew. That sounds intense. Barracudas can be pretty unsettling, especially when they decide to make eye contact. It's interesting how even experienced divers can feel fear in those moments. The way you described it, they seem to have a mind of their own. Good thing you swam away and didn't have to deal with any aggression. It's always those unexpected encounters that stick with you the most. I was diving off the coast of Fiji, and we went through a natural tunnel, like a 10-meter cave/passage through a rock formation. So we start swimming through the cave, and suddenly the light was weird, like the blue tint from the water has been replaced by a red one. Now all divers will know that this isn't only weird because the color changed, but also because red is the first color to disappear after a certain depth, usually between 30 feet-10m and 40 feet-13m, and we were over 70 feet, 23 meters deep. Also bear in mind this was late morning on a sunny day. So imagine this scene. Me and my dive buddy are going through an underwater cave, and suddenly everything, for no apparent reason, is tinted red, a color that you were literally supposed to be unable to see while diving at that depth during the day. Upon exiting the cave, everything was back to blue. I thought it was just me, so I didn't signal to go back up. After the dive, my buddy asked me if I'd seen the water tint red too. We can't explain it, and the folks from the local dive shop had no idea what we were talking about. That's a strange experience. The change in color is definitely unusual for that depth. Seeing everything turn red like that must have felt surreal, especially since you both noticed it. It's interesting how the mind can play tricks underwater. Not getting any answers from the dive shop adds to the mystery. It sounds like one of those moments you'll always remember, even if the reason remains unexplained. Down in La Jolla, California, they have caves along the coast that you can swim through if the tides are right. This particular day, the water level was high enough that you could swim through this one cave that was pretty narrow. Well, it's my turn to swim, and when I'm halfway through, a set wave comes in and clears the cave while I'm still in it. I was smashed against the side of the cave, bloodied up the back of my shoulder pretty good. But we're thinking, well shit, we just got in the water. We were planning on swimming out to a buoy and then back to shore. So I just say fuck it, let's do it. Exposed wound in an area known for great white sightings, no big deal. Gotta get a workout in. Well, we get to the buoy, and I just have the biggest sense of dread. We're probably a good 15-minute swim from shore, and I start thinking about this wound on my arm, just leaking shark bait into this giant, vast ocean full of stuff that probably wants to eat me. Sure enough, I'm looking down, and I see something swimming towards me. It's dark. I'm like, what the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? And I started swimming away from it, and I turn around and I see two more of the same things coming at me from different directions. My face goes completely white. I'm expected to get grabbed and pulled under and never seen again. Nothing happens. My friends can see the look on my face, and they're asking me what happened. We all decide to swim in together. My friends were all better swimmers than me, but on that day, I beat them all back to the shore easily. I'm practically kissing the sand when I finally made it to the shore, and this old man comes up to me and says, "You shouldn't be swimming with that cut on your arm. You're attracting sharks." Edit. They were probably seals if anyone was wondering. Edit 2. La Jolins unite. That sounds like a pretty intense experience. Getting smashed in a cave and then worrying about sharks must have been something. It's wild how you pushed through and still swam out to the buoy despite the cut. The old man's remark at the end just adds a bit of dark humor to it. glad nothing serious happened, and it turned out to be seals. Just goes to show how your mind can run wild in those moments. On one of my night dives at the Flower Garden Banks Marine Sanctuary in either 2005 or 2006, had my first encounter with a beaded sea cucumber. I thought I stepped out of the real world and into a science fiction/fantasy world, seeing this long worm with tentacles surrounding its mouth like a cross between a snake and an octopus. Very scary initially. Now I look for them because they are pretty cool. On a more recent dive this spring, although I knew I was going to see it, the whole purpose of the dive after all, finding the 3-year-old 80 pounds golden lab that had been swept away in the spring floods and trapped in debris under a bridge scared the heck out of me when I first found her body visually. Knowing you were looking for it and actually finding it are two different things. But at least I was able to bring her body home for her family. That sounds like quite an experience. Encountering the beaded sea cucumber must have felt surreal at first. It's interesting how something can go from being scary to cool over time. The story about the lab is tough, though. Knowing what you're looking for and then finding it can be really intense. At least you could help the family by bringing her home. Those dives seem to leave a strong impact. I grew up diving as my family owned a dive shop. I've dove all over the globe, but the thing that creeped me out most happened on my local lake. I was about 10 and had taken our ski boat from the dock to a secluded cove to look for an abandoned cemetery. The lake was created by TVA in the 30s and displaced an entire town, leaving several places like this lost in the trees with no access. When I got onto the shore, I found a blanket with all the edges tied together to make a bundle. I didn't open it, but did some exploratory poking. There was obviously a cinder block in there, and the rest was just squishy. After a particularly vigorous poke, blood started seeping through the blanket. I hauled my little ass back to the boat and never looked back. Decades later, I still think about that and wonder what was in there. On a lighter note, our shop got a lot of business retrieving dropped items and speedboats that idiots would sink. My dad was the shop's master instructor and normally passed these jobs on to me or one of the regulars. However, he took one job in January to test his new dry suit and took along one of his friends. I was there gear-toed and waited on shore. Dad came up first and started telling me about this weird-looking fishing lure he'd found while sifting through the silt. About that time, the buddy surfaces and asks Dad why he was playing with that tampon for so long. I had an awesome childhood. That's an interesting mix of experiences. The spooky find in the cove is unsettling, especially with the blood part. I guess it makes you think about what's left behind in places like that. On the other hand, the fishing lure story is pretty funny. Surreal how childhood moments can combine creepy and humorous like that. Seems like you had a lot going on growing up around water. I was knee boarding one time in a lake not too far outside of my hometown. The water is very murky and dark. Well, the front end of the board dipped downward into the water, but I kept holding onto the rope. I shot probably a good 20 plus feet deep in a matter of a couple of seconds, and when I let go, I completely lost my place at space. It was pitch black, and I couldn't tell if I was right side up or upside down. Didn't really find anything scary, but being that lost in space is truly terrifying. Started buying more buoyant life jackets from that point forward. That sounds intense. Getting pulled under like that can really mess with your head. I can see why you'd want a better life jacket after an experience like that. It's good to learn from these moments, especially when visibility is so low. At least you didn't panic too much and managed to come back up. It's just one of those things you wouldn't forget easily. I was snorkeling in the Caribbean, and I got separated from the rest of the group. We had been sticking close to the shore to look at the small fish and things. Touristy stuff. I stayed behind to look at a small school of fish, and when I looked up, they were all way ahead of me. To catch up, I took a shortcut across deep water. I was swimming along for a while, not seeing any fish or anything, when I just saw a murky outline in the distance. You know, when you're looking at something underwater from a distance, and it's just a shape. Like that. But it was huge. Easily bigger than me. Just slowly swimming parallel with me. I didn't take the time to investigate it closer, and just swam to shore as fast as I could. Still gives me chills when I think about it. That sounds like an intense experience. Getting separated while snorkeling can be unsettling, especially with something big lurking nearby. It's wise that you didn't push your luck and left it alone. The ocean has its mysteries, and sometimes it's better to just stay on the safe side. It's easy to get lost in the moment, but you made the right call. It's good you made it back. I swam out into the middle of a lake in northern Wisconsin on a warm summer day. I was floating on my back, just relaxing. After a bit, I started thinking about how deep the water was, and then about a horror movie I had recently seen that featured a giant monster bursting up through the water in a lake not unlike the one that I was floating in. I started to feel kind of nervous. Suddenly, I heard the most god-awful roar, as if the lake was exploding beneath me. Terrified, I bolted up to tread water, only to see the trailing smoke from a SEC fighter jet that was practicing flying under radar. That's a pretty intense situation. You're just trying to chill out in the lake, and then your mind goes to some horror movie monsters. The roar would definitely be alarming, especially after thinking about all that. It's crazy how our imaginations can run wild like that. At least it turned out to be a fighter jet and not something from the movie. That would catch anyone off guard.